Let's take you now to Ottawa. Here is the Prime Minister. Let's listen.
We have the President of the Queen's Privy Council for Canada and Minister of Emergency Preparedness, Bill Blair, the Minister of Public Safety, Marco Mendicino, and the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, David Lametti. So Prime Minister Trudeau will make a few remarks and then we will turn to questions. A reminder, it is 20 minutes of questions, 10 in the room and 10 on Zoom. À vous, Monsieur le Premier ministre.
Merci beaucoup. Bonjour tout le monde. Hello everyone. Je suis accompagné aujourd'hui de la vice-première ministre
I'm
Freeland
accompanied today by Deputy Prime Minister Freeland and Ministers Lametti, Mendicino and Blair.
These weeks have been incredibly difficult for the people of our capital city, and they've been stressful and disturbing for all Canadians. The situation is not anything anyone wanted, and quite frankly, not anything we'd want to see again. Lundi dernier, après avoir
On Monday, after having consulted the provinces and territories, the federal government invoked the Emergency Measures Act. Tuesday, the Coutts border crossing in Alberta was reopened, and Wednesday, the blockade in Emerson, Manitoba was removed. Today, the families and workers in Ottawa are gaining back their neighborhoods and their freedoms.
I want to take a moment to thank the law enforcement agencies from across the country who joined the operations. And I want to continue to thank them as they ensure that, among other things, Canada's border crossings remain open, including in Windsor, and that all communities are safe. We didn't want to use the Emergencies Act. It's never something to turn to without serious consideration. But after weeks of dangerous and unlawful activities, after weeks of people being harassed in their neighborhoods and small businesses forced to close, after billions of dollars were stalled in trade, putting people's jobs and livelihoods at risk, after the National War Memorial was desecrated, after evidence of increased ideologically motivated violent extremism activity across the country, after a flood of misinformation and disinformation washed over Canada, including from foreign sources, after these illegal blockades and occupations received disturbing amounts of foreign funding to destabilize Canada's democracy, it became clear that local and provincial authorities needed more tools to restore order and keep people safe. For the past few days, parliamentarians have been debating the Emergencies Act and will be voting on it tonight. I ask all members of Parliament to take action against illegal blockades and to stand up for public safety and for the freedom of Canadians. Invoking the Emergencies Act has been necessary. Law enforcement agencies relied on it to set up secured areas in downtown Ottawa and at border crossings. It prevented foreign money from continuing to fund illegal blockades, and it's making sure our borders remain open. It has been the responsible thing to do. We now have a choice to make as a society. We can choose to keep reliving these scenes that tear at the values that bind us as Canadians, or we can choose to remember who we are and the best vision of what Canada can be. What we've seen in these past weeks is not the story of this pandemic. The story of this pandemic is one of unity and solidarity. La pandémie, c'est l'histoire des travailleurs.
The pandemic is a story about the workers in the health sector who come to work every day, regardless of how tired they are or the difficulties that await them. It's the story of truckers and frontline workers who keep the economy running. It's the story of children and seniors who have remained strong and resilient. We've seen people across the country who have been working together and adapted together to save lives. We've got some of the highest vaccination rates in the world. We've all made sacrifices. And yes, it was difficult. The lives of 36,000 Canadians were taken by COVID-19. These were grandparents, parents, children, friends, and neighbors. But throughout it all, we were there for each other.
Through this pain and heartbreak, Canadians answered the call because Canadians are good people. We're among the world leaders in vaccination and health outcomes, as well as in economic recovery and job creation. It took courage. It took resilience. But we did it together. And despite the many challenges that we faced, our democratic institutions remain strong. We don't always agree, and that's okay. In fact, it's not only healthy to have debates in a democracy, it's necessary. Our government will always defend freedom of expression and freedom of peaceful assembly. These values are at the core of our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. They're at the core of who we are as Canadians. In a democracy, you can protest, you can share your opinion at the top of your lungs. You can disagree with elected officials, you can certainly disagree with me. But you can't harass your fellow citizens who disagree with you. You can't hold a city hostage. You can't block a critical trade corridor and deprive people of their jobs. You can't attack journalists for reporting, which is essential to our democracy. What you can do is vote. What you can do is run for office. That's how change happens in a democracy. On est tous fatigués de la pandémie.
We're all tired of the pandemic, but that doesn't mean you have the right to participate in illegal blockades or occupations or to put others in danger. And it's unacceptable to attack a journalist because they're doing their work or to intimidate people and get in the way of the freedom of the press. There's no doubt that the last weeks have been trying times, that the last years have been painful, and that there are still challenges to be overcome. But we can't let anger divide us.
More than ever, now is the time to work together. It's also the time to reflect on the kind of future we want for our country. There's a lesson for all of us in what happened this month. We don't know when this pandemic is going to finally end, but that doesn't mean we can't start healing as a nation. And it starts with all of us. If you spend a lot of time online, try looking outside your social media bubble every now and then. If you have a cousin who you haven't seen in a while because they're unvaccinated or because they're vaccinated, give them a call. If a political conversation got heated during a recent gathering and a friend or relative left early, pick up the phone. Not to try to convince them, not to argue, but simply to ask how they're doing. Look, in the heat of the moment, we can all get carried away trying to win an argument. But not every single conversation has to be about winning an argument. Sometimes it's more important to just be there for one another. As a country, let's aim for more decency in our public discourse, not less. Let's cherish the democracy that we have, and let's commit ourselves every day to working together to make it even better. Merci.
Merci, Monsieur le Premier Ministre. So, like I said, we will
Thank you, Prime Minister.
20 minutes of questions, starting with questions in the room. So we have 10 minutes. I would ask you, ministers and the Prime Minister, if you could keep your answers short, that would be greatly appreciated because we have a lot of questions in the room and on Zoom. And for people on Zoom, if you could use the raise hand function to indicate that you have a question, that would be greatly appreciated. And on va commencer avec David Thurton, CBC.
We'll start with David Thurton, CBC.
Do we still need the Emergencies Act? The blockades have been cleared. Parliament Hill has been cleared. Do we still need it?
As I said, the Emergencies Act is not something to undertake lightly, and it's something that needs to be momentary, temporary, and proportional. That's why every single day I'm receiving briefings and we are reflecting on how much longer the Emergencies Act needs to be in place. We don't want to keep it in place a single day longer than necessary. But even though the blockades are lifted across border openings right now, even though things seem to be resolving very well in Ottawa, this state of emergency is not over. There continues to be real concerns about the coming days, but we will continue to evaluate every single day whether or not it is time and we are able to lift this state of emergency. But I will turn to Ministers Mendicino and Blair, who on this question wanted to say a couple of words.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, and thank you for the question. Look, I think there's no doubt that we have seen significant progress here in Ottawa, and after 3 weeks of torment for local residents, for small businesses, for you folks who've been reporting, and you know, the images have been shocking and at times and deeply concerning. This morning and yesterday, we saw calm, peace, and quiet. And I think that that was certainly a sense of relief for all of us. But we know that there are still a number of individuals who are affiliated with the illegal blockades who are in the area. Just this morning, we saw that there's some reports for potential activity in the area. So we have to remain vigilant. And not only in Ottawa, but at our ports of entry. A couple of days ago, there was an effort to try and block Surrey, an important trade corridor at the Pacific Highway. We continue to watch very closely activities in Windsor, and we're following the advice of our law enforcement. And I would just point out that we've had a number of individuals reach out, including the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police, the Canadian Association of Police members, who are the rank and file, who have said to us with a very clear and singular voice that the Emergencies Act is a tool that is continuing to not only address the illegal occupation here in Ottawa, but also being used very effectively to prevent future blockades. Now, I want to echo exactly what the Prime Minister said, which is, I think, a sentiment that we all share across government, and that is we do not want to use the Emergencies Act for a single moment longer than is necessary. And I believe that when you survey the conduct of law enforcement over the last number of days, what you have seen is restraint. I mean, take a look at the way that the police carried themselves throughout the course of dealing with the illegal occupation here in Ottawa. There was a degree of professionalism and focus, despite the fact that there was an emotionally charged atmosphere, despite the many provocations and intimidation, and at times efforts to assault police officers. And that, despite all of that, we saw a minimum use of force. So I think that that kind of conduct will continue to carry through the Emergencies Act, but we won't use it for any longer than is necessary.
Ministers, we have 10 minutes only for questions, and we're using it all up on the first one. You want to stay for an extra 10, break.
Yep.
Bill.
You know, I'll take your point, David. I think clearly the police have used and the measures that we brought forward in the Emergency Act appropriately and to significant effect. We're pleased with the progress that's being made. We're monitoring on a daily and even hourly basis the threat environment with our senior officials and with law enforcement, and we are committed to ending this emergency at the earliest opportunity. But clearly, we're not out of the emergency yet, and so we'll continue to monitor that very carefully. I hope that's satisfactory, David.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau, Laurence Martin, Radio-Canada.
Hello from Radio-Canada. If the act is used in a preventive way, what is the threshold to remove it? Because the truckers could come back in 2 months, 3 months, so does that mean we'd have to keep it for another 2-3 months? Indeed, this is something that we're thinking about. Of course, at some point, once it's lifted, we'll have to remain vigilant as to what could happen afterwards. But we still feel that now right at this moment, the situation is still fragile. The state of emergency is still there. We're going to continue keeping an eye on this each day and see when we can lift it. Won't be for right away, but every day we're going to reevaluate, and we hope that we won't keep it for one day longer than necessary.
Bergeron Oliver for CTV National News. My question is for Minister Freeland, I believe. Two Conservative MPs say that their constituents who donated small amounts, about $50 or so, have had their bank accounts frozen. I'm wondering if this is a case of a mistaken use of powers granted to banks under the Emergencies Act, or is the government going after any donor, including small donors?
I'll turn to Minister Freeland in a second, but the measures that we put in place are designed and focused on ensuring that people in the current illegal occupations leave. That has been the intent and the focus right now. If there are specific cases that Conservative ministers can bring forward to highlight where that is not the case, we would happily look at them and hope to resolve them. But I'll turn over to Minister Freeland.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for the question. So first of all, just as the Prime Minister said, particularly right now, at a time which is very fraught, it's important for all of us to be very, very careful to get our facts exactly right in each circumstance. And I would urge all of us to take that care in every situation. In terms of the financial measures, the RCMP has given to the financial institutions names of leaders and organizers of the protests and of people whose trucks were part of occupations and blockades. That is the only information, according to the RCMP, that the RCMP has given to financial institutions. I think it's also really important for everyone to be clear, and this speaks to the getting our facts straight point, that these measures applied only as of the 15th of February. That is when financial support of these illegal blockades and occupations began to be sanctioned. And then finally, let me say, for anyone who is concerned that their accounts may have been frozen because of their participation in these illegal blockades and occupation, the way to get your account unfrozen is to stop being part of the blockade and occupation. These measures were put in place to disrupt illegal activity in Canada. And, we were very clear last Monday that we would be following the money, that we would be using financial tools to disrupt illegal blockades and occupations. The focus absolutely has been on leaders and on the vehicles that were such an important part of the illegal blockades and occupations. That has been the only focus of law enforcement. Thank you.
Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau.
Question, Mr. Trudeau, I'd like to know, are you going to impose the party line for the vote of this night? And what about a vote of confidence? Answer. First of all, I have a hard time imagining that a parliamentarian who votes no to these measures this evening could imagine that it would be something other than showing confidence and trust in the competency of the government. But I have total confidence that the majority of parliamentarians this evening will vote to protect the rule of law and protect Canadians, their communities, and their freedoms.
I can't imagine that anyone who votes no tonight is doing anything other than indicating that they don't trust the government to make incredibly momentous and important decisions at a very difficult time. But like I said, I am confident that the majority of parliamentarians will stand up to support our values, to stand up to support our democracy, and to stand up to support their fellow Canadians. J'ai répondu.
David Aiken, Global News. Thank you for taking our questions, and thank you for the kind words about supporting our work. I'd suggest the best way to do that, of course, is take an extended amount of time for questions from journalists. I heard what you said in reply to my friend David Thurton, and I heard the very same similar lines repeated by Minister Mendicino, repeated by Minister Blair. We don't want this to go on for 1 second longer. I really want to press you. Give us a specific power in the Emergencies Act, which is vital right now, that is not present in the provincial emergency orders, in the criminal code, and any other number of statutes that already exist. What specifically is in that act that is so vital right now to protect Canadians?
We saw for a number of days and weeks into the blockades that it was extremely difficult to get tow trucks to come and tow big rigs. One of the specific measures is an ability to compel tow truck drivers to come and do their jobs. When the Emergencies Act was brought in, many tow truck companies said, okay, we'll do it, didn't need to be compelled, but there were some companies that needed to be compelled under the Emergencies Act to remove trucks. And we've seen right now that there are trucks holding in places like Arnprior and Embrun and other places that are have indicated a desire or an openness to returning to blockades right now. So that is a power we may well need. The power to designate critical infrastructure like border crossings as not just the actual border crossing itself, which of course is protected under current legislation, but the approaches to border crossings, 15 kilometers up the road from Coutts, for example, or the municipal approaches to the Windsor crossing, that require police to be able to designate that as areas where people not just occupying, but indicating a desire to go and occupy that intersection can be turned away. Just in the past days, there was a convoy from Fort McMurray destined for Ottawa that was largely turned away at the Manitoba-Ottawa border based on the laws and the powers in the Emergencies Act. Now, this is not something that we want to imagine continuing indefinitely in Canada. We hope to only keep it in place for a number more days. We will reevaluate every single day. But right now, when the situation is still of people pre-positioning, people being out there indicating that they are ready to blockade, to continue their illegal occupations, to disrupt Canadians' lives, we feel that this measure needs to remain in place while this emergency situation is still in place. And I could give other occasions, but I'll turn to another question instead to try and get as many as possible.
Sir Lee Berthiaume, Canadian Press, good to see you. You've said you don't want to keep the Emergencies Act any longer than necessary, but you have also said that you want to make some of the new powers around fundraising platforms, reporting to FinTrack, permanent. I'm wondering what other powers you're looking at making permanent, what other changes after this crisis have passed.
One of the things that is important and right about the use of the Emergencies Act is there are already many mechanisms around review and oversight, whether it's a parliamentary committee, whether it's an inquiry afterwards, whether it's a need for openness and transparency, whether it's even court cases that are coming forward to challenge it. All those are part of the checks and balances that make sure that these actions we took are the right ones, which we know they are. At the same time, there needs to be a reflection about misinformation and disinformation and how Canadians' lives can be disrupted by it. There needs to be a reflection on foreign funding of illegal actions in our country designed to disrupt or destabilize our democracy. There have to be reflections on our ability to keep our borders open and free-flowing and protect critical infrastructure like the seat of our democracy. These are things that will be debated and reflect on in time. We will work with parliamentarians to move forward in a way that is responsible and properly measured to react and proact in terms of what we see potentially coming in the coming years.
Okay, thank you for that. We are going to go on questions on Zoom. On va commencer avec Hélène Buzetti, les coop de l'information.
We'll start with Ms. Buzetti. Yes, hello. My question is for Minister Freeland. Hello, Ms. Freeland. Earlier, you had said that the way to unfreeze your account is to no longer take part in the blockade. However, there are no more blockades. So are we to understand that the funds will be unfrozen soon? And if the vote is negative tonight, does that mean that automatically those counts will be unfrozen? And if I may ask another one, Mayor Watson said that we should sell the impounded vehicles. Would the law allow for that?
Okay, merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question. I will start by saying that it is very important to have accurate data. The standards on seized accounts are not shared with politicians, and that is the way it's supposed to be. Second of all, as I just said, police officers have shared with financial institutions the names of the leaders of the blockades and leaders of the occupation and the names of truckers. That is the focus, that is the target of what the police forces are working on. Now, about what one should do to unfreeze their bank accounts. First of all, it's important to recall that bank accounts can be frozen for a number of reasons, and a number of reasons that have no connection with the occupation or the blockades. And it's important to be sure that the account is not being frozen for any other reason. If a person is certain that the account was frozen because of illegal action, and that there's a connection with the occupation and the blockade, then the person needs to speak with the police, who will then communicate with the financial institutions to unfreeze those accounts. And lastly, as concerns frozen accounts, this was a measure that was taken to end the blockades and the occupation. It is not a retroactive measure, it was a very targeted measure. It was not a permanent measure. We have no intention nor the right to take people's money. This was really a way to end the illegal blockades and occupation. And I can repeat that in English if it's useful, but if not... No? Okay. Thank you. And as for the truckers, what about selling them? For the trucks? Answer. I spoke about the federal powers, and there are also measures and powers that remain with the municipality and the province. Thank you.
Parfait. We're going to go to John Ibbotson, Globe and Mail.
Good morning, Prime Minister. Concerning the situation in Ukraine, if Russia were to recognize the independence of Luhansk and Donetsk and send troops into the region, would that be sufficient to trigger sanctions by Canada? And if it were not sufficient, why would that not be the case?
First of all, we continue to see Russia positioning itself and trying to create excuses or reasons to violate Ukrainian territorial integrity, to violate the sovereignty of Ukraine, and we continue to stand against all such measures. We will fully stand for the entire territorial integrity of Ukraine and do not recognize any attempts to independently recognize or autonomize the separatist-occupied regions of eastern Ukraine. Canada stands with Ukraine. Canada stands with its allies against this aggressive Russian positioning and will respond strongly and firmly with our allies in the case of any territorial violation of Ukraine.
Understood. I suppose what we're asking for, though, is some sense of a threshold. What actions the Russians would need to take before Canada would feel justified, indeed required, to initiate a response?
As our allies, as Americans, as Canada, as European allies have been clear, any violation of Ukraine's current territorial integrity will be seen as a violation by Russia of some founding principles of the UN and of the rule of law as we practice it around the world right now.
Raymond Fillon, TVA.
Question from TVA. Thank you. Hello, Prime Minister. You said that there was a lesson for all in what happened this month. What is the lesson for you? Response. First of all, the Canadians are tired. They are fed up with COVID, with restrictions. They want them to be over. And for the majority of Canadians, they know very well that the way to get through it is to continue being careful and to know that things improve when we trust science. But there are also people who, for all different kinds of reasons, were misinformed or found themselves in difficult personal situations and who are very angry against the institutions, against science, and against their government. And as a society, we must recognize that the way we got through this pandemic, and better than most other countries that are similar to ours, well, it's because people were very much there for one another. And how we'll get through this pandemic and get through this crisis of occupations and blockades is to make sure that we continue being there for each other. And this is what I will always focus on, being there for each other now and for the people, the citizens of Ottawa who'd like to get back to their daily lives, being there for the workers in Windsor who have seen plants closed down because of the blockade. It's being there for people in the country who don't want to see violence or illegal occupations. We're going to continue being there for each other and try to bring Canadians together and heal as much as well as we can. Do you have any regrets as to the way you managed the situation for the last 3 weeks? Some people have criticized you and said you didn't want a dialogue with them. Response. There are always things that need to be reflected on after any crisis or any measures that are taken. I think that we were very clear at each stage that the way to influence political policy and to change things in a democracy is not through unlawful means occupations that hurt fellow citizens. It's through political action, going to vote, like Canadians did 6 months ago. And also, if you really want to change things, well, run in the next elections. Encourage Canadians to support you so that you can make change. That's how a democracy works. We can't just say, oh, well, there's unpopular measures. We're going to go blockade Parliament and make them change their mind. That's not how democracy works. If these people really desire change for the leadership of this country, well, there's a way to do that. It's to run for elections, to get elected, and to get the approval and support of the majority of Canadians. And not just that of those who support you in your immediate circle.
We have time for one last question. We're going to go to Jacques Gallant, Toronto Star.
Hi, good morning. Prime Minister, you mentioned earlier about oversight and you talked about the parliamentary committee. I'm wondering, when will that committee be struck and what exactly will it be able to do? What exactly will its powers be?
Part of the rules around the formation of the Emergencies Act is the striking of a joint parliamentary committee between the House and the Senate to report back on the use of the Emergencies Act after the Emergencies Act had been in place, to talk about how it was used and to report back in a fulsome way. The discussions are ongoing with the various parties on exactly that issue. David, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you, Jacques. It's a wide-ranging set of powers that the committee has to go back and look at. First of all, the declaration, the justifications contained in that declaration, any orders, as well as the implementation of those orders. So, and as well as forward-looking advice for what we might want to do down the road. So that committee has a wide-ranging set of responsibilities, I would say first, as well as powers. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And Prime Minister, I wanted to ask you again this question that you got earlier, but I don't think I heard a response. Is tonight's vote a matter of confidence?
Like I said, I can't imagine anyone voting against this bill as expressing anything other than a deep mistrust in the government's ability to keep Canadians safe at an extraordinarily important time. But like I also said, I am confident this bill is going to pass.
And that is the end of our press conference. Ceci met fin à la conférence de presse. Merci beaucoup au Premier ministre, aux ministres qui ont pu rester quelques minutes de plus.
Thank you very much to the Prime Minister and ministers who could stay a few moments longer.